be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable, but not to eat like comfort food. To disregard the bogus claims of pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was no one left to prove a claim you make. And folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never made mistakes. It's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth, bro. Question everything, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason.
Hi, I'm Rob Penczak.
And I'm Liz Green.
Welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. We have a great show today. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Syed and Sarah H, two of the co-founders of Ex-Muslims of North America. First, we're going to introduce you to Liz Green, one of our new hosts. Liz, maybe you can start by telling us how you got involved in secular humanism.
Well, when I was really young, I went to Bible school, and right away I realized that there was something wrong with the idea that Adam and Eve came out of thin air, and I started questioning it very young. I was raised Catholic, but didn't realize that there was people like me until I was in about junior high school and I had access to the internet.
Right. So when did you first start to question? You were like 6 or 7, or were you?
Yeah, I was about 6 or 7.
How did your parents react to that?
As a child, sometimes you're not able to verbalize your thoughts as well as you can as an adult. And so I didn't really know how to say it, how I felt, except that I might have talked about it with my friends, and they certainly didn't know how to verbalize it either. And so it wasn't until I was much older in junior high school and high school where I kind of came out of the closet as an atheist.
Right. And you said that the internet really helped you with that?
Yes, and it's so great that we have so much more freedom than so many other countries in this world that ban the internet or have so many restrictions, because I think that there's so much knowledge on the internet that you can learn and realize that there's more people like you.
Right, it really does give you that chance to interact with an entire community and not feel so isolated. Mm-hmm. How did the friends that you were able to talk to in high school and junior high, were they receptive or they didn't know what to do with it?
Most of them didn't really know what to do with it, and the ones that felt that they felt similar to me still weren't willing to be verbal about it, and so it was very difficult.
Yeah. Well, hopefully those times are starting to change, because there's an enormous percentage of the young population that either doesn't believe or certainly doesn't want to affiliate themselves with the religion. So hopefully we'll be heading in the right direction, where as other young atheists try to come out, there's a lot they have to contend with socially, but hopefully it's going to get easier and better. Mm-hmm. So,
yes, definitely.
Anyway, why don't we dive into a little bit of the news? Since it's Memorial Day, we're going to start by talking about a couple of military-related things. First, the Veterans Hospital scandal that's been in the news a little bit. You had some very strong feelings on that, on where the blame should lie and where we want to make sure who doesn't get blamed for that. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely, yes. I am a regular patient at the VA hospital in DC, and I want to make sure that as a veteran, I give credit where credit is due, and we have to be so careful not to blame the individuals working at these hospitals, because for the most part, they're extremely professional and they really do care about the well-being of veterans. I think that it's important to realize that and also speak out that it is the government funding the VA or defunding the VA that is a problem. Right. And so we don't want to demonize the individuals working at these hospitals and clinics around the country.
Right, no, and that's a great point. And even if they, with the VA at some point, they were saying, well, we didn't really defund them. If the caseload has gone up so dramatically because of all the wars declared or not, we really need to try to match that with personnel. And like you said, all the doctors and nurses and everybody trying to take care of patients in the system is really trying to do their best. But I can't stand that sort of false patriotism where everybody is thrilled to support the military, but then when they're overseas fighting, they try to, cut their benefits, cut their health care, not take care of the spouses, and it's just so hypocritical. And then it comes down on the
Individual
military personnel that served.
Absolutely.
All right. So another point I wanted to bring up. Let's go to Jason Torpey of Military Atheists and Free Thinkers. has been trying for a long time to try to help get humanist tags available for people in the Army. And that, he had an article about a month ago that's finally come through, where people in the military, if they don't want to just say they're atheist or agnostic, they want to be humanist because it better encapsulates their values, that's now a possibility. And so, congratulations for getting that through to Jason Torpy.
I think that's excellent. I think that it is way overdue.
Right. And you were talking about some of your experiences in the military, that you did face some religious discrimination. Can you talk about that a little bit? Absolutely.
It started immediately in basic training, when you try to get to know your fellow soldiers, and people don't even know what atheism is, I guess, from what I experienced. And I actually had to explain to them what it meant. And I thought that I had left that behind in high school. And then I meet a whole new group of people that had never even met an atheist. And there was a few other people that were atheists as well in basic training. But throughout my military career, I noticed that once someone found out that I was atheist, they did treat me differently for the most part.
Right, and I understand they also have a lot of, if you're working that hard, you're going to be in such a dangerous situation, you're trying to bond with your group, and they say, okay, it's all time for all of us to go pray to Jesus, and you might be able to say, well, okay, I object, I'm not going to go do that. You've now put yourself aside from that entire group, who you're later going to be relying upon to protect your life. So it's very important to somehow get some secularism back into the military, and we're very far from that at this point, is my understanding.
And I actually remember when we were going around a group, we're sitting on the floor, and the drill sergeant was there, and she was asking us what our religion was. And I had just had a conversation with the person next to me, the soldier next to me, and she had said she was atheist as well. But when it was time for her to raise her hand and say her religion, she declined to say no preference.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
that's a tremendous amount of pressure that we need to acknowledge, and we should not pretend that it isn't there. And you're asking young men and women to go put their lives at risk. They're completely away from their home environment. It's as terrifying a situation as it could be. And I remember when Jason was on, he talked about how some organizations, they have this all over their websites, they really put out, this is the time that we can prey upon these young people away from home. It's when we can get them. So it's not an accident, all the proselytizing that happens in the Army. But anyway, I think we're going to take a quick break and hear from the infidels from Atheism TV, and after that we'll come back with Muhammad and Sarah.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Al-Masjid, a mosque located in downtown Islamabad, Pakistan, is paying tribute to one of the most wanted terrorists in American history with a recently inaugurated library honouring Osama bin Laden. Speaking from the room inside the mosque with a sign that reads Martyr Osama bin Laden Library, cleric Maulana Abdulaziz defended the dedication with zeal. If Pakistan truly has freedom of expression, then we should be able to express our love for our heroes, Aziz said. And we love Osama bin Laden. According to a report from the New York Times, clerics sympathetic with bin Laden and his cause are taking advantage of the Pakistani government's weakness in separating itself from extremism. Lal Masjid, which translates to Red Mosque, has historically been a hotbed for militant Islam inside Pakistan, and in the 1980s the church sent fighters to wage anti-Soviet jihad in Afghanistan. In the next decade, clerics journeyed to Kandahar to pay a visit to bin Laden. The mosque was the site of a siege in July 2007 as government soldiers battled militants who used the church as a base of operations. Pakistanis like Pervez Hudboy, a physics professor, have spoken out against the actions of the extremists in the nation. We need a strong counter-narrative, something that gives purpose to the war against the Taliban. But that is lacking, and while people criticise the Taliban for their tactics, many believe their hearts are in the right place because they are fighting for Islam. Cyril Almeida, a writer with Dawn newspaper in Pakistan, said that while a resurgence of military in and around the church was unlikely, extremists winning the narrative possess other risks for the embattled nation. The more they gain visibility on the nation stage, the more the myth of militants fighting the good fight against an illegitimate state gains in strength, Almeida said. And that makes the narrative war more difficult for the state to win. A woman seemingly fed up with gender inequality in India has led the charge to promote a Sharia law that is gender neutral, a bold vision for a Muslim religion that has historically been deeply rooted in misogyny and a male-dominated culture. 20 years ago, after Khartoum, Sheikh saw her sister-in-law become a victim to a violent husband and then victimised by the courts, Sheikh began her own court that was based on a kind of Sharia law for women. Once operating from Sheikh's home, the court is now located in the Mumbai region of Bandra and is part of the broader Indian Muslim women's movement. The organisation plans to bring its idea for a gender-equal Sharia law court before the Indian Parliament. We want to challenge the legal concept of Sharia law and reclaim it for ourselves. Nurjihan Safia Niaz, a co-founder of the organisation, said. Since 1937, Indian Muslims have had the right to resolve family issues regarding inheritances, divorce and marriage and child support based on Sharia law. But in the 1940s, reforms of Sharia law in India became secondary to other goals like economic development and fostering national solidarity, according to a report from the Washington Post. Under current Indian laws, a man may divorce his wife either verbally or through a written document and with or without consent. Men have the right to initiate a break in their marriage by reciting the words, "I divorce you," 3 times in front of a witness. Samina Chrissy recently experienced this type of impersonal divorce when she received a written notification from her husband. "He just gave me a piece of paper that said, 'We're divorced.'" Chrissy testified to female court in Bandra. "It's a very patriarchal system," Niaz said. "In some places, women aren't even allowed in the courtroom." The Old Testament, the Jehovah's Witness publication The Watchtower, and other religious texts deemed to be the most radical and dangerous are being banned and confiscated in Azerbaijan as local police are waging a campaign against the literature of various religious sects. Baku-based APA news agency published a list of books on May 5th. In addition to the Old Testament and Watchtower, some of the banned books include The Debate of Scholars from Baghdad by Maghafi ibn Aytiya, Sunnism by Abu Rahman, and The Century of Emergence by Ali Karanu. Numerous Muslims and Christians inside Azerbaijan expressed concern over the ban and confiscation to the Forum 18 news service. One Christian told Forum 18 that local followers of Judaism use copies of the Old Testament translated into Azeri as their main religious text. "We need to pray to God for wisdom and to how to respond to this ban on the Holy Scriptures in Azerbaijan," one Protestant church member said. "It could be a mistake, a lack of attention by officials, and irresponsible attitude to sacred scripture. Or it could be an intentional act." Orhan Mansazad, with the Information Department of the Interior Ministry in Baku, would not disclose why police are raiding homes and confiscating banned books. "Everything is done in accordance with the law," Mansazad told Forum 18 earlier this month. "The reasons are explained in the statements we put on our website in individual cases."
All right, we're back. Thank you to The Infidel at Atheism TV. And we have Mohammed and Sarah with us. Thank you for joining us. These are 2 of the co-founders of Ex-Muslims of North America. Maybe you guys can start off by telling us why it was so important to start this organization and what your prime goals are.
Okay, well, we started the organization when we first actually met each other and found that we didn't know any other ex-Muslims, and we had believed that there was no such thing as another ex-Muslim. So we thought that we then needed to find some kind of way to get other people together who thought like us, and to build sort of a support network for everyone who was going through problems relating to leaving Islam. And so.
And Liz, you mentioned that the internet was very helpful to you as an atheist, even in our relatively safe setting. How's the internet been for you guys?
We wouldn't have been able to do half the things we have been without the internet. And without the internet, we probably wouldn't have left as well. Like, the availability of information is key. Growing up in an Islamic household, you're fed certain facts, which obviously are very, very biased. When you actually go out there and study and try to understand Islam, you figure out what actually happened, the historical settings of things. So for myself, the reason I left Islam was I spent a year studying it, and a lot of that was online, reading various journals and stuff. And as access to that expands, I'm sure it'll happen more and more to more people.
That's a recurrent theme that we see, that education and study seems to lead people away from religion. What was your experience? How did you end up?
I actually met a very loud atheist when I was Muslim, and he was very abrasive, very rude, and he was my friend up until that point when he became an atheist and he started questioning my beliefs. And he would print out hadith and verses from the Quran and show them to me, and he'd be like, "This is what your religion really is." And I didn't believe him. I couldn't believe him. So what I decided to do was go to the internet and get evidence to prove him wrong. And I was so intent on it that I started reading and studying and looking into what I always assumed to be the truth. And I found that, oh my gosh, he's right. I'd never admitted it to him, actually, but that was when I first became, until now, if he was watching. But yeah, that was what led me to leaving religion.
Right. We've seen that with Christian fundamentalists also have that similar experience, where they're called on something and they're going to dive into their Bible because they genuinely believe. It's not like religious people are nasty, mean people. It's their parents were this or they were born in that religion. And so those people that do go back to their books and find out, oh my goodness, it really does say this, have your similar experience.
What would you tell people that said, well, Islam is actually a really great religion. It's a good idea, but...
Well, I mean, I think a lot of those people, they really don't know what the Quran actually says and what the Hadith actually says. And I think this is true for a lot of religions out there. I mean, I think that's true a lot for Christianity, and I think it's especially true for the Quran, especially because it's written in Arabic. Most Muslims don't speak Arabic, so they have to learn through translations, which are not considered to be the proper way of learning. You're supposed to understand Arabic and then read in Arabic. So what it does is it prevents most people from knowing what is actually in the Quran.
Right. Well, would you guys mind giving us a little background, maybe define some terms like the difference between Muslims and Islam, where Arab comes into this, what the hadiths are, just a little bit of background, because I imagine a lot of people don't know much about Islam.
So Islam largely started in Arabia, and it was a consequence of Muhammad trying to unify Arabia, and from my perspective, he looked at the unified Roman Church and stuff and tried to copy that model. And as it spread out, they wanted to impress superiority of Arabs and Arabic over the other conquered people, Persia and various other countries. And therefore Arabic was a lingua franca for a long time. And there were issues, rebellions as a result as well, because a lot of people felt discriminated against. Regarding the Hadiths and the Quran, so the Quran is analogous to the Bible, except that it's far closer in time to Muhammad. It was compiled within the next 2 to 3 decades after his death. The Hadiths are the sayings of Muhammad. And they were compiled between a century and 2 centuries later. So from a rationalist perspective, they're largely Chinese whispers. And their content largely reflect that as well. Like, there are various ludicrous things in there, such as camel urine can cure illnesses. If there's a fly that is in your drink, make sure to dip it thoroughly.
But some of these are given very substantial weight, is that correct?
Those ones usually aren't.
Not those two.
But there are I would say 80 to 90% of Islamic jurisprudence is based on hadiths. The Quran itself is a very small document compared to the Bible. It's got 100 chapters, of which most of them are less than a page long. So as a result, for example, prayers. In Islam, you're supposed to pray 5 times a day. The Quran does not mention this. It just mentions prayer. You have an annual pilgrimage to Makkah called the Hajj, and that is specific dates, specific times, specific rituals. None of that is in the Quran. The Quran just mentions that it's a holy place to go when you're supposed to go. So the vast majority of Islamic jurisprudence would fade away without the Quran itself.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and the Quran is actually it's painted as the perfect and complete way of life, the guidebook to live. But in actuality, it contains very little policy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. All right. I guess we can talk about a few things. Why don't we start by, the main things I think we want to talk about are true bigotry that Muslims are facing here, and separate that out from Islamophobia and how you see that term being used. And maybe we can, so you can just outline that a little bit first, and then we can go into some specific examples.
Well, bigotry is a real thing. And we were both once Muslims, so we know what it was like, especially after September 11th, to be a Muslim in America, or a Muslim in the West in general. And when I first, I think a few weeks after September 11th, I had rocks thrown at me on my way home from school, and kids screamed, go home, go back home.
Oh,
and so I know that exists, and we all, I think, especially the ex-Muslims, know that happens and know that that's a real thing. However, Islamophobia is usually, the term Islamophobia is usually used to shut down criticism of Islam, which is a completely different thing. And especially when it comes to the Western people talking about Islam, it's usually used as, well, you are Islamophobic if you criticize Islam in any way, which is where I think we come in, because it's harder to say that we're bigots.
Right. It's very important for that, from the inside of the community, to acknowledge these are a lot of problems that we have, instead of a white guy on the outside saying
both things should be like genuine criticism is genuine criticism, no matter which quarter it's coming from. It should be entertained. Mm-hmm. I was at a talk recently at Georgetown about Islamic democracy in Pakistan, and there was a Pakistani girl there, and she and I got into somewhat of an argument about how mosque and state are never compatible. If you look at any religion, whenever religious power is assumed by the state, you have tyranny of the majority, and really bad things follow that. And she was very unhappy with that. And we were having a long conversation, and there were a few Americans there, and they interjected, and they only listed a few facts. And her immediate reaction was, "You're a bigot." Mm-hmm. They didn't make any judgments. They listed facts in Pakistani history that these events happened.
Right. And it really shuts people up. It's a very effective way. As soon as you call somebody a racist or a bigot, especially if you're on the liberal side, you really try to not be bigoted. And we've seen that. There's a handful of people, like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and they get smeared as bigots all the time because they point out some of the facts that you're
exactly. So a fact is a fact. There's nothing racist in pointing out that certain communities or certain issues that are going on are bad. If you're, on the other hand, painting people as bad, that's a very different distinction. So the way we like to describe it is that we're for criticizing Islam. We're for criticizing the fundamentals or foundational texts of Islam. But that is very different than criticizing the people. So we will not tolerate bigotry, but on the other hand, we won't tolerate apologism either.
Right. I saw on your website you have a beautiful comment about, and you have to walk a very fine line, because, and Sam Harris ran into this a couple of years ago, where he pointed out that sometimes it's only those wingnuts on the far right that are so filled with hate that are admitting that Islam is a problem. But I don't want to tie my wagon to them either. Why don't we talk about a couple of real cases of bigotry? You're familiar with Pam Geller? Yeah. And maybe you can talk about the ad that's running on the DC buses right now.
Well, that's a tough one, particularly because, there's Pamela Geller, and I think for people that are familiar with her work and what she's been doing, I think it's pretty clear that she's kind of a bigot.
Well, she's calling, she's a truther, and she's pretty sure that Obama's our Kenyan president trying to restore the Islamic Caliphate.
Right. I think there's a lot of wingnuttery going around in Pamela Geller's camp. However, it is true that the hadiths that she points out and the Quranic verses that she points out, those are real, those exist. And there is an anti-Semitism sort of strain in Islam, and that is true. However, I think that the campaign, particularly the bus campaign that she did, I think that was more for, I think what she wanted to do was sort of incite inflammatory sort of discourse, which wouldn't help anybody.
Right. I had a very similar reaction that, yes, there's certainly bigotry in there. I thought it was ironic for Pam Geller, the avowed Christian, not to notice what Christianity thought of Judaism for the last 2,000 years as the Christ killer and blood libel. But it gets very hard, and that's why it's really important to have some people from your community even saying, here's the true parts about this, here's the bigotry that underlies it, and try to separate them out. A second case, let me see the other one.
Well, I wanted to ask you, as a woman, how does it feel to be going to the mosque without a hijab when everyone else has one?
Well, in the past few years, I haven't stepped into a mosque, thankfully. But when I was practicing, I did go to a mosque. I was Shia Muslim, which in some circles can be a little bit more liberal than Sunni Muslims. My mosque was gender segregated. I did not see the men. We entered to a completely different entrance, and I never contacted a man. There was actually a video feed of the sermon that was being given on the male side that would come into the women's section, and that was all that we saw of a man. So at my mosque in particular, it didn't matter so much because it was gender segregated that I was covered. I did try to cover as much as I can. I think that there is definitely just an attitude of if you're a woman that doesn't cover, then you're a woman with looser morals, and you're a woman that's not as pious as the girl who is covering. And growing up, definitely I felt that from my parents and from my community at large, that my cousins who chose to cover were the perfect daughters and the perfect Muslims, and they're going to get married to these rich men and be successful in all areas of life and then go to heaven. And me, on the other hand, with my hair being shown, I was perceived in a completely different way.
Right, and in France and Belgium, they actually went and passed laws against this, the niqab, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, where it just leaves your eyes visible.
Niqab, yes.
So maybe, what do you guys think about the laws that they passed there? The reaction, I've seen very interesting reactions from both sides. What do you think about that?
I think it's a fine line. There is no easy solution to that. So, for example, in France, they've banned it completely. You've got freedom of expression, freedom of thought kind of issues where you should be able to wear whatever you want to wear, and you're getting to the same territory as Islamists are, that they will mandate what you can or cannot do, which is dangerous. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the reason they did it was a valid reason. There is forced coercion where people are forced to wear certain things, and especially it happens with children as well. If you go to Islamic websites and look it up, they put hijab on toddlers.
This is so common.
The flip side of that is, how do you fix that problem? In the UK, what they've done, not about the hijab specifically, they have a law called Forced Marriage Act, which is basically a lot of these communities have, they take their children to whatever origin country, Sudan or Pakistan, and marry them off without any consent involved. And usually it's very young, 16, 15, those ages. So they passed a law that if the child or their friends or their educators or anybody associated with them reports it and they investigate it and it's true, the parents go to jail for 2 years. But how many children will actually report their parents? It's an imperfect thing. You can't really, I don't see a easy solution to it either ways.
Even here, we talk about sometimes childhood indoctrination, with Christianity or Judaism or any religion. When you start, the kids, it's not like their freedom of choice. Mm-hmm. And this is an argument, where it talks about, if women should have to cover. Some of the Muslim apologists are trying to say, hey, you're taking away this woman's freedom of expression. A lot of the Muslim feminists are saying, no. This is all about, women aren't real people. They're just objects. They have to be covered and hidden. So it is complicated. Nobody wants to get rid of that freedom, but it's hard to know what to do with people that are indoctrinated since they're 2, 3, and 4 years old and taught you'll go to heaven, you'll marry well, you'll all these things. Is that, how much of that's really their choice? And I don't know a good answer to that.
I mean, and I would say that, and this is my personal opinion, that a good way of going about it would be to ban it with children. Anyone under 18 shouldn't ever be wearing the hijab in a public place. And then after that, if a woman chooses to wear it, I think that's a very different thing. I have family members who were forced to wear it since they were children, and then I have family members who chose to put it on when they were adults. And the way that they put it on and the circumstances were completely different. The ones that had their parents forced them to put it on when they were children continued wearing it as adults, but they had a very different view on it. They didn't know that they could take it off. They didn't feel like they had the autonomy. And then if you've been wearing the hijab ever since you're a child, to take it off is a very difficult thing to do. You feel naked and you feel exposed and you feel like, this is impossible, I can't do this. So that's a very different thing. So in my perspective, I don't think children, like what you were talking about, childhood indoctrination, it's a pretty big thing. And it's very common in Muslim communities, especially Muslim communities that are very insular. and are not exposed to the outside Western influences.
And you chose to wear the hijab while you were in junior high school for a short period of time.
For a short period of time, I did put it on. I was going through puberty, and I thought that, well, now that I'm a woman, the way I should be controlling my sexuality and all of this, and I don't want to, incite sexual, feelings in men and all this. So I put it on for a little while, and then taking it off, even though I wore it for a very short amount of time, taking it off was difficult, and I did feel naked, and I felt it was a very hard thing for me to do when I did do it. So I can't even imagine what women who have been wearing it since they were 7, 6 years old, and then taking it off when they're adults. It must be very difficult, and I would say for some impossible. I actually know some ex-Muslim women who, even after leaving Islam, they couldn't take off the hijab. Despite not believing it anymore, it was so difficult for them. It was like a security blanket.
One other thing I'd like to point out, what she said, that incite lust. So that's a recurring theme within Islam, that women are the issue of sexuality is laid on the women's doorstep, and they have to cover and they have to hide themselves. And men are largely brutes and animals. Just looking at a woman will make me go nuts, and therefore you have to. If I'm the one that's an animal, if I'm the one that is a brute, why am I not chained?
Exactly. Yeah, I saw a comment about that. Why don't the men, if this is such a good idea, why don't they cover themselves up and cover their eyes, and then it won't be an issue?
It's not too different from still some ideas about rape and culture in the United States, even. So it's very much like that. And to me, it reminds me of, say, if you told, okay, well, African Americans, in order to stop inciting racial hatred, they should cover up their black skin. Yes,
so that racists don't react to it.
That's a good analogy.
Well, fortunately, as John Roberts said, racism is no longer an issue in the United States.
Well, thankfully.
Yeah, we had a chance, I was talking a couple days ago, and you had mentioned something about how the Muslim community, even here in the United States, is still very insular, and what happens when you face real bigotry. Can you explain how that makes things all that harder to sort of reach the community?
So basically, from an Islamist perspective, an insular community is a good community because it's easier to control. So the agenda of racists, where it forces people to pull back in, and Islamists want that. So basically, when people are being racist, they're actually giving fodder to Islamists. They're making the problem worse and worse. So I don't know how do we reach the people that are bigoted, but ultimately what needs to happen is Muslim communities need to integrate better with the West, and we all need to work on that. And if you have friends that are from other religions and other people that you care about, atheists or whatever, the chances of the bigotry existing on either side is lowered dramatically. You have like homeschooling, you have Muslim-specific schools, and there are schools in America where girls it's their uniform, they must wear hijab from a very young age. And again, it goes back to the same indoctrination thing, and in order to break that, you need a multiracial, integrated society.
Right, I think one of the problems is that a lot of these right-wing, like the fundamentalist Christians, I don't know how interested they are in settling the problems. Right, we just went to Iraq for a crusade against the infidels, and that kind of language matters.
Yeah.
So maybe we can now talk about Islamophobia a little bit, how that term is used. Why don't we start? There's a few different cases I want to talk about. Let's go way back to Salman Rushdie. Can you explain, what horrible, terrible things was he doing that got a fatwa declared against him?
He satirized the Prophet, and anything bad about the Prophet cannot be tolerated. He wrote a novel in which there were allusions to certain themes within Islam. And it wasn't specifically, it was a fictional novel. But as a result, how dare you do that? Your head must be chopped off. And that's a widespread experience. So in Islam itself, apostasy is something, the punishment for it is very clear. There are various schools of thoughts, and the variation is, should you be killed immediately or should you wait 3 days to give you a chance to repent? But overall, you will be killed. So
and it's sort of laughable, except that he's had a fatwa for a couple of decades. People really do get killed for this. And I've had some friends in the Islamic community that really try to point out people in the West don't quite get it. We complain about the politics here, how bad the fundamentalists are, but it's really different when you're talking about people getting murdered for these things and stoned to death, and it really happens.
It's like the Middle Ages. You live in the Middle Ages. The Inquisition is actually a real thing that's happening right now. And it's very hard for people to understand the extent of it, where an average person will be okay with killing you because you have done such a horrible, horrible thing. In Pakistan, you have blasphemy laws whereby it's criminal to criticize Muhammad, it's criminal to say anything bad about Islam. Most of the people that die as a result of that are not executed by the state. You have mobs actually lynch them.
Yeah, and you have a lot of people like talking about how, well, talking to specifically to Muslim activists and to Muslim leaders about issues like this, and they will kind of walk around the issue, and it's pretty easy to see when you know what you're looking for, is that they'll talk around and they'll say, well, it does say that in the Quran, but it's so hard to implement that it's very unlikely that someone will get killed, and things like this that happen a lot. And you have a lot of Muslim leaders that are fine with tolerance when they are in a Muslim or when they're in a Western country, but you see that shift dramatically when it's a Muslim majority country and when they have all the power.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about CARE a little bit? Because I mentioned to do that when we were talking about Pam Geller and that kind of ad. CARE has some good aspects and some bad aspects. Maybe you can go into that while we're on Islamophobia.
So, as we were talking about, anti-Muslim bigotry is a real issue. I've experienced it, she's experienced it, my family has experienced it. And CARE does activism in order to minimize that and to fight back when it occurs, like the Pam Geller bus ads, for example. But on the other hand, they don't make the distinction between reasoned critique of Islam and bigotry. So anybody that criticizes Islam is automatically a bigot. Christopher Hitchens was quote-unquote a bigot according to them. And I'm sure we will be labeled bigots by them as well. So foundationally, there are problems within Islam, and until and unless you confront them and reform them, nothing can actually change. And CARE is not willing to make that distinction and make that change. So regarding the apostasy thing, for example, Muhammad himself was involved in killing people. Muhammad's first in command, Abu Bakr, he led wars in which thousands upon thousands of people were killed for apostasy. Ask the CARE people, do they condemn that? Was Muhammad wrong for doing that? Was Abu Bakr wrong for doing that? You will never hear that.
Right, and you'll see a lot of gyrations in debates with Muslim apologists also, like you said, where they get a little squirmy about, well, it's sort of kind of in the Quran. But yeah, people start to dance around these things that are clearly morally honor killing is terrible, bride burning, there's all these horrible things, and lots of people aren't aware of them. And we need to bring that to public awareness, and criticizing the dangerous tenets of any religion needs to be on the table. Mm-hmm. So, let's see, another example we could talk about is the Danish cartoonist Kurt Westergaard. Maybe we can, what did he do, what terrible thing did he do for which somebody actually, two people tried to murder him and there were riots?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Danish newspaper decided that, I'm not sure about the exact, I think there was
Jyllands-Posten,
yeah.
The newspaper.
Yeah, and they had a few cartoons published about the Prophet Muhammad. And some of them were inflammatory, but some of them were not. And this was sort of an exercise in free speech. And I think it got turned into, once it started, and this is partially because of the internet, that newspaper was able to reach across the whole world. Mm-hmm. And then you had people that saw it without any context and saw only the most inflammatory ones. And then you had riots all over the place. You had riots in Pakistan where people were killed in the riots. And you had riots, I think, in other Arab countries as well. And these were quite dangerous.
So basically, the idea of freedom of speech and where you can satirize, that's not a common idea. One of the good things that came out of that, in my opinion, is the Draw Muhammad Day. You can target one reporter, you can target one comic artist, you can't target tens of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. So the same thing needs to happen with Islam as well, with ex-Muslims as well, and that's one of the things we're working on as an organization. So right now you have people like Ayana Hirsi, who's under a death threat, and you have very few people that are publicly ex-Muslims. We're trying to build communities in every single city in the US and Canada, and we're active in about a dozen cities now. And we're hoping to have an entire army of ex-Muslims. Who are you going to target? 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people? Right. So the same thing with Christianity. Initially, the first people that spoke out in the Middle Ages had a very bad time. Over time, their numbers swelled to such an extent that the church lost all power. And that's the same thing that needs to happen over here. If you have the law should be based on secular values that are shared by everybody in the state, not by some divine commandment from the Middle Ages or prior to that.
And you've made an important point before that Christianity went through the same thing. We had the witch hunts and the Inquisitions. As barbaric as you could possibly be, Christianity has been there and done that. And then they had the Reformation and things are marginally better now. Can you talk about what a moderate or progressive Christian is now and how much of that exists in the Muslim community? Because I think that's probably part of the problem.
I don't think that, I think there's a huge distinction between what is a moderate Muslim and what is a moderate Christian. And I think people tend to use that word as if it's equivalent, but it isn't. And Islam, I would say that a very liberal Muslim is equivalent to a fundamentalist Christian. And so you could imagine what goes on when you say moderate Muslim, and people say, why aren't the moderate Muslims speaking up? And it's because the moderate Muslims aren't really against what went on with the Danish cartoons and how people were targeted and were killed. The moderate Muslims are not against that. So I think there has to be some point where, especially like Western intellectuals and Western liberals realize where it is on the scale of fanaticism and liberalism, where Islam, the majority of Islam lies. So I think that especially when we're talking about multiculturalism and Islamophobia, that becomes a major thing, because the moderate Muslims and the liberal Muslims start speaking up, and the liberal Westerners think that, okay, well, these are our brethren, and they aren't being forced to wear hijab or practice their religion, so we should be on their side.
Yeah. How much do you think education and poverty sort of contributes to the lack of a large, broad, robust, progressive Muslim, wing?
I don't think that's the biggest issue. So you have states that are rich. Saudi Arabia is a relatively rich state, same with a lot of the Middle Eastern states, but they're the most fundamentalist as well. The issue isn't...
Is there a broad population? Well, I mean, I don't know. Is the broad population
to
well
a great extent, yes.
Okay.
Basically, the issue is that with the West, you have had generations upon generations where the church has been ridiculed, and it's been proven again and again how wrong and how outdated and how eccentric the teachings are. In Islam, that has never ever happened. So one of the things in Islam that I often like to talk about is in the Jerusalem-Palestine-Israel conflict, why is Jerusalem the third holiest place in Islam? Because Muhammad traveled there on Pegasus.
Right.
So how many Muslims believe that? Why is that still regarded as a holy place? Why does the average Muslim not go, this is insane?
All right, I'll try to bleep that. No, but you're absolutely right. So it takes a large degree of magical thinking, and that should send off bells and whistles for everybody. There's a flying horse. This is no different than Greek mythology, yeah. But it doesn't, in some people. Maybe we can. There's a couple other things I want to talk about. One is on your website. You do a very cool thing where you have either some hadiths or quotes from the Quran, like, only Allah can know what's in the womb and stuff like that. And then you juxtapose it with a ultrasound picture of a fetus, and it's a boy. You do that with weather also. What kind of reaction have you gotten from, does that jar some people and say, oh wait, this is just make-believe?
Well, we hope it does, and that's why we put things like that on there. I mean, what you were talking about earlier with education maybe being a problem for why people don't leave Islam, or why Islam is as fanatical as it is. And I think it's not education overall. I think it's specifically being exposed to certain kinds of viewpoints. And I think that we all have blinders on. And there's certain things that we all take for granted, certain things that we know for sure. Of course, gravity is a real thing, and of course that exists. And most people don't know anything about the actual force of gravity and how it works and the physics behind it. They just accept that and know it is the truth. And when in Islamic societies, it's so deeply pushed into you from a very young age. Of course, Islam is the perfect religion, and you cannot criticize it because you cannot know what God is thinking. So you never question that. You never question that. The first time I met my raging atheist, that shocked me. It really did shock me. I was just like, I can't believe that it is even possible to have these complaints, because I just assumed, of course, it's the perfect liberal religion and all these things that I believed. I sort of assumed that Islam believed also, because it was a good religion, it was made by God and all these things. And it wasn't until he sort of shook me very deeply like that I went back and looked into it.
Yeah, I think that's a very effective way for faith to spread as a virus, is you cut any skepticism off at the root. They don't wait until you've read 3 books by a bunch of atheists or philosophers. They make sure you know right away, if you ever question this, you're out of the family, you're not going to marry well, and then it's just not worth somebody's risk. And that was when I was reading stuff about how women should be allowed to dress. That was a big part of it. That they just get to you so early, and it's the only way that a woman can survive in such a stifling environment is to figure out how to adapt and go along with it. And you actually internalize that, and then you're a woman 40 years later and you still can't bring yourself to stop wearing it.
Absolutely, and you feel like this is what's empowering me, and it's just almost a coping mechanism because you've been brought up to be a certain way, and you don't know any other way, and you feel like you are incapable of being any other way. So I think part of that is just a coping mechanism to feel powerful within the community and the society that you're in.
Yeah.
Well, and also too is, I always, when I go to George Mason University's campus and I see these women that are engineering students and statistics students and very intelligent women that are covered up, and I always wonder, how do they balance their religion with their studies, and if maybe in the future are those going to collide more strongly?
You would think and you would hope, but that's not, I don't think that's related at all. I know a lot of very educated, highly educated people that, and in South Asian communities especially, education is a very, it's a thing of pride, and it's a goal that everyone should go towards. I think most South Asian parents don't accept that you just stop at a bachelor's degree. They want you to become a doctor or an engineer. So a lot of people in our community are very highly educated, but that's not making them question their religion. Because like I said, I think it's a blinders on. It's this sort of just partial sort of insanity and irrationality where there's certain things you just accept because it's just been so long that you've always accepted it. I think the first meeting of an atheist is the most shocking event in like a Muslim's life, that especially an ex-Muslim atheist. So I think, and that's the first thing that sort of topples it down. And if they are educated, sometimes it happens quicker than if they are uneducated, the road to become a skeptic and an atheist. But not always. Sometimes it is the educated people that will go through all kinds of loops, rationalizations, and they will attempt to be very academic about it. And it's actually very it's very obtuse sort of thinking. I mean, but it takes a long time to get there because they hide behind big words, they'll hide behind logic, and they'll hide behind history and all these things that didn't really happen in that way. So, yeah,
I have a friend of the family who's, I don't want to identify their sect because it's it's very small, so they would know who it is. But they're brilliant, and they know all sorts of history, and they can quote everything, and they're just really smart. They're professionally very well off. And they use all of that brilliance to justify like that cognitive bias. And that's really a lot of how we think, is we come to the conclusion we want first, and then you use your intellectual resources to justify that. And you don't see that anywhere better than in religion. One other thing we want to talk about was Boko Haram. I saw something in the Daily Beast recently where it was saying that the same way some Christians will go bomb abortion clinics, but that has nothing to do with Christianity. So that was his argument. And so just the same way these people are doing things in Boko Haram, it has nothing to do with Islam. So first of all, does bombing abortion clinics have anything to do with Christianity? I mean, do any of us doubt that? And then maybe you can just explain what's going on there and how's the tie into Islam.
Well, I think any country with a lot of political instability, a lack of human rights, political corruption, you're going to see an insurgent group, a militia armed group like Boko Haram pop up. However, they'll take different forms, and they'll have different scopes depending on what the culture is in the country that this group is forming in. And I think Islam, while I don't think that Islam is the reason behind Boko Haram, I think there are other factors that led it to its creation and its sustenance. I think the Quran doesn't specifically say, well, any of these things are bad. In fact, you can, instead of the moderates and those that are opposing Boko Haram using the Quran to say, hey, what you're doing is immoral, you're seeing it on the other side. You're seeing Boko Haram holding up the Quran and saying, what we're doing is right,
but the girls
what we're doing is godly.
Are yours, and your property to sell them off to marriage.
Within the Quran, sex slavery is specifically sanctioned. That's in the Quran. Muhammad had sex slaves himself. Muhammad himself traded in slaves. So there's nothing that Boko Haram is doing that is un-Islamic in any way, shape, or form.
And this isn't well known.
So in the modern world, slavery has been abolished to a great extent. Therefore, most Muslims presume that slavery has no history in the Muslim world. When, again, Muhammad was a slave trader. Even beyond that, like you had the Western slave trade, and we talk about it in America. There are horrors within America's past. But if you look at the Arab world or the Muslim world, the same thing has happened over there. And there's very little coverage done about that. Most Muslims are completely oblivious to the fact that for over 1,000 years, they did the exact same thing. And even worse, like due to their proximity to Africa, they raided entire kingdoms, and millions upon millions of lives were lost for generations.
Right, and here in the United States, again, I think that it's fundamentalist Christians or extreme fundamentalists are much closer. I have a lot more in common with you guys as Muslims than I would with a fundamentalist of any religion. And we had slavery here, it was justified with the Bible for years, and you can go back as an apologist and find, well, the Bible also says this and that, and there were certainly some abolitionists that were religious, and there's lots of very kind religious people that try to do good things. But the facts of the matter are, all of our holy, sacred, perfect Word of God documents were fine with slavery.
Yeah.
I think especially the Abrahamic religions, they work very similarly, and the texts are very similar. So when you have people that leave, they usually have looked at the exact same problems, and we do work with ex-fundamentalist groups and have like a dialogue with them, especially the ex-Mormons, and there's a lot in common, especially in the journey to apostasy and what went wrong and how you looked at it. A lot of it is very similar, and especially the saddest part is the community reaction to leaving religion. Often the more fundamentalist a group is, the more they're likely to use any power that the community has to just push you down and forbid you from leaving. And so it's a thing that they use all aspects that they can: the family life, the social life, the political life, anything they can to keep you within the religious bubble.
Yeah, again, I think the Mormon community is also extremely insular, like you guys were talking about. And I have a few friends, and it's funny not funny, but just to watch them struggle with, they're smart, they get certain things, they certainly have progressive values, they can look at their books and see, all of the chicanery that went on in the beginning of Mormonism particularly, and yet it's really hard to walk away from that community. And it's critical what you guys are doing, is trying to give people a place to go. The Dawkins Foundation is starting there kind of openly secular. I think we need to just grow these communities where people that want to live a rational life feel welcomed instead of shunned.
One of the issues generally with the West perception of the problems within Islam are it's viewed through a Western lens. But when you look at it, the great tragedy is you have over 1 billion people that are subjugated. You may have hundreds, if not thousands, of Einsteins been born over the past 1,000 years and not expressed their genius. Where would human civilization be if that hadn't happened?
That's a good point.
We're set back for hundreds of years.
And I also think that, there is something about reaching out to religion if maybe you were born secular and your parents are not really religious, and then you try to latch on to religion as a comfort. And I've been asked the question, probably you as well, that so many times, well, what do people do? What happens to people when they die? And how do you deal with that and things like that?
Well, people, of course, they have a lot of questions about what are you doing? But the question that I've heard the most often has been, why is there something instead of nothing? And that's a complicated one in the sense that it's hard to get them to talk in a reasonable framework because they're not speaking logic. So it's very hard to get them to understand or even start speaking about that. I think religion is a comfort, and especially I think in poor countries and poor parts of the world, it is a comfort. You don't have much to look forward to. Life is very difficult. Religion seems to make things easier, but I think as we've found, there are plenty of places in the world where religion is making things worse. I think in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Bangladesh and India, where it's very strongly making things worse for a lot of people, and even the most oppressed, the most poor people.
And aside from just the psychological help religion does by providing a community that will help with childcare, and if somebody's unemployed, it will help with feeding. There's a lot of practical things that being part of any community really solves. And that's part of how religion sort of keeps people in, is it does give these tangible benefits that are critical for people surviving.
And that's one of the things that we're trying to replace. We're building communities where we can replace what you have lost. A lot of people that when they leave Islam, they're completely abandoned. We've had multiple members who have been beaten by their families, who have been threatened to be killed by their families. And at that point, if you have nobody to turn to, it's a very hard journey.
Right. And you said that was, because I was surprised, you said that's here in the United States, right? That there's a lot of it's still hard to walk away from the families here, because I don't think I certainly wasn't aware it was such a problem here. I thought once you were here, you would have the community be okay, but I guess it's not.
The communities are so insulated, and I mean, I was brought up in the United States, but for a long time I didn't know many Americans that weren't Muslims. I didn't know them. I wasn't encouraged to go and socialize with non-Muslim people, so I mostly knew my family and my extended family and my mosque beyond that. So I wasn't sort of raised to become part of the larger American culture. In fact, you're actually taught to have a different identity, a Muslim identity, and the Muslim identity is the number one identity that you're supposed to have, and it goes above anything else. It goes above American. So although you could say that because you're raised in America, it seems like maybe you should have all the resources that America provides, but I think that sometimes they're often just as abandoned as anyone else. You're often taught that Americans don't want you. Westerners don't want you. They won't accept you. And they often use examples of real-life bigotry to make you feel that that's definitely the case. So you kind of feel like, well, you have nowhere to turn.
So the other thing is you often infantilize women in particular, and even to a certain extent men, so that they are helpless and they can't really leave. So if you know nothing about how the real world works, it's not easy to actually step out, and you don't have any confidence if you've never held a job, if you've never dealt with budgeting. One of the persons we were working with asked us, does she need to get a passport to be able to leave her state? Basic information that you would expect the average 20-year-old to know, much less average, like you would expect the 15-year-old to know, is not common.
They're insulated from real life experiences, especially women. And women are encouraged to stay home if they're going to go to college. That's a if. They are encouraged to go to colleges nearby in the area and not leave, and that's a very tough thing to be able to convince your parents that you should move out for college. I've actually heard of very few people that have been able to do that. In my family, only myself, really.
Let's see, we have just about a minute left. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to make sure that we knew? Is there any way that people that are not in your group, because I know it's only for ex-Muslims, if somebody's just a secularist, atheist, a humanist, and they want to reach out and work with you guys, how can people get in touch and how can they help you?
We have our contact information listed on our website. Generally spread the word that there are ex-Muslim communities out there. The problem often is that most people that leave Islam don't know there is any alternative out there. There's anybody that can help them out. So we would ask to spread the word as much as possible.
And the website is www.exmna.org.
Okay, and we can put that up on our Facebook page. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We just have a few seconds left. Please tune in next week, like us on Facebook. We will invite you guys to monitor our Facebook page. If people have questions for Sarah and Mohammed, please post them there and we'll get to them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're really sorry about that.